Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen-Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 83, The Martian Movie Review. Chris McBrien, and that is Yancy Eaton, and this is Pop Goes Your World. You know, if you're new to the podcast, we don't just review Gen X movies around here. We also take a look at millennial movies, and this episode we're going to do just that. We're going to take a look at 2015's The Martian. But before we get started, Yancy Eaton, my friend, how are you, man?
Chris, I'm doing well. My cat, Nico, who's a rescue cat, my wife and I adopted him together before we got married. He has been extremely under the weather and several expensive veterinary trips, but it looks like he's going to make a full recovery. And yeah, that's been like the focal point of my life right now, is just trying to worry about this cat. It's really weird that I used to be that type of person when I was younger, where I had like this weird thing about animals. Like I didn't like touching dogs and cats. I would not consider myself like a pet person at all. I'd always wash my hands when I was in a room with a dog or a cat. And now like I'm so like incredibly emotionally invested in the welfare of my dog and my cat at home that like, time really stops whenever he was sick. And we dropped him off at the vet for just not even a whole day, just half a day. We wouldn't even leave him there overnight. And just the feeling, I know this sounds very like woo-woo, like new age stuff, but like the energy in our house was completely different without him being there. And obviously cats aren't nearly as emotive and expressive, and they don't show as much emotion as, say a dog does, or obviously a person does. But it was weird just not having that one little facet of our family in there. And it's kind of nice to have him back. And, it looks like he's going to make a full recovery, thankfully. But other than that, I've just been really hunkering down again, just diving back into reading as much books as I can. And I'm trying to set a goal for myself to pump out, a large chunk of books right before the end of the year starts. I turn 30 in December, and I'm just trying to like set myself up from an intellectual standpoint. I know this sounds super corny, but whenever your job consists of a lot of routine and a lot of things are the same, it's nice to kind of set goals for yourself and feel like you're working towards something. So that's kind of what I've been doing, is just taking care of the home and just reading like it's my job. What about you?
Man, you're going to be 30. That's great. I won't be able to call you young fella anymore. You're going to be old like me soon.
Yeah, I'm basically there, Chris.
Yeah, you're basically old and ancient like I am. We got some snow this morning, believe it or not. Just couple light things, but the snow is coming, that's for sure. Last episode, I was talking about how my wife and I were looking for a new show to watch. We binge watched Breaking Bad and a couple other shows recently, and we're looking for a new one. And I think I mentioned we tried watching The Wire, and I didn't like it. A couple people told me I got to watch Better Call Saul, and I don't know, it's going to be tough for me because when I watched, and I'm not saying I'm not going to watch Better Call Saul, maybe we will at one point, but for me, when I watched Breaking Bad, Odenkirk's character, I didn't really like it that much. I thought he was a weak point on the show. I know people are going to email me about that, but so I don't know. Maybe we'll come around to it. I tried watching House of Cards. We watched one episode. I heard so many good things about it, and I'm really, really political too, as you know. So I'm like, I'm going to love this show. Watched one episode, didn't like it. I was like, no.
Chris, I've never seen an episode of House of Cards. Yeah. I've never seen an episode of The West Wing, and both shows are so popular, and you always hear them references like, some of the best shows of the last 10, 15 years. I've just never cared enough to watch them, and I know that that's probably just a blind spot on my part, but like, I feel you. I just don't. I don't know. I just don't want to get into it.
So we tried a new one, and it's and I got some high praise for it. It's Ozark. So a couple of people told me I got to watch Ozark. So it's only 2 seasons on Netflix right now. I think they've just been commissioned for a 3rd season. It'll be coming out at some point. But I'm almost done season 2, and it's really, really good. Oh, it's really good. I like it a lot. So that's a good one. I'd recommend to anybody that's out there. But yeah,
I watched about the first 5 episodes, and I liked it. I definitely liked it a lot. It's kind of like Breaking Bad, but instead of like dealing drugs, it's all about money laundering.
Right.
It's a really I don't want to say it's a totally unique premise. Like I said, it's very Breaking Bad-ish, but just a different spin. But what's his name? Jason Bateman.
Yes, and Laura Linney. And Laura Linney's really good in it too.
Yeah, it's off to a great start. For whatever reason, I just stopped watching it. Maybe because I think my sister changed her Netflix password, and I'm too cheap to buy my own Netflix subscription.
Makes sense.
So I'll get around to it eventually. Jesse, if you're listening to this, I'll ship you another $20 here eventually.
You gotta get one of those Android box thingies, and you can watch whatever you want. That's what you need to do. Listen, if anybody out there wants to reach out to us, you can get us on Twitter at Yancy Eaton or at CMcBrien. Just remember, McBrien is IEN, or you can always go to popgoesyourworld.com. Find all our information on there. And we do have a bit of an ask, Yancy and I, before we get started. If you could just take 2 minutes out of your day and go over to iTunes and leave a review. Write a review for the show. That would really help us out. It helps us reach a lot more people. So that'd be great. Other than that, Yancy, are you ready to get started with our movie review this week?
Chris, I was born ready.
All right, let's do it. Not Ryan Adams, but Bryan Adams, right, Yancy?
Back in the early 80s.
Yancy, you can find it on YouTube.
Let's Go Crazy.
Oh, I've heard that before.
The indie kids, the skater kids.
I never liked the Tragically Hip.
I would say that's borderline blasphemous.
My hometown of Port Elgin, Ontario.
We're quibbling at this point.
Must be getting early. Clocks are running late.
Oh, yeah, it's a Grateful Dead. Just knowing that one piece of trivia makes this whole thing worth it.
Okay, so this week, like as I mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at 2015's The Martian. I'm going to let you kind of kick things off in a second, Yancy, because this was your movie that you nominated. It's a millennial film that we're going to get into. But before we do, I just wanted to make a statement, if I could, if that's cool.
Absolutely.
Dude, we get it. You really like space movies.
I do.
I just want to say something up front. Like a while ago, our good buddy Nate Dawkin from the Nasty Cast, he kind of pointed out the fact that every movie that you nominate for the show round here is either a space movie or like set in a dystopian future. And it seemed to me, maybe I was wrong, but it seemed to me that you had a bit of an epiphany on the podcast.
A bit.
And you stated that you realized the error of your ways. And you recognized that you were stuck on space movies and these dystopian future movies. And you on the podcast, we'll go back and I'll find it. You committed to making a concerted effort, young man, to nominate different movies. And, movies from a more diverse thematic point of view. And so the first movie that you nominated after your transformation is a dystopian film about an astronaut stuck alone on Mars trying to survive. I just don't.
Whoa. Okay. First off, an explanation. Okay. You are right. I did say that. And namely the reason why I this is kind of bad. This makes me look awful, but I forgot to pick a movie. Okay, so I forgot to pick a movie, and
at least you're being transparent. That's good.
Yeah, I didn't have it prepared for me for whatever reason. Even though we have the same format as far as like whenever I have a movie, I know that you're picking a movie next. I know all of these things, and
so what you're saying is we got to the end of the 16 Candles, and then when I got to the point of the show when I said, Yancy, what's the movie that you wanted? You didn't have something prepared for your movie. That's
Correct.
What you're saying. Okay,
Correct.
Just so I understand.
Okay, so I get that out of the way. I own that. That's on me.
That's very honest.
Totally. Nathan's totally right for saying that, and he's a good dude. I totally understand that. However, I do take umbrage with the fact that you're calling The Martian a dystopian sci-fi movie, which it is very much not. It is the opposite of dystopian. This is a movie that has a ton of heart. It is extremely optimistic. This is about a guy that loves life, refuses to give up, and it's about the world basically rallying around behind him, like a bunch of people that are on disparate parts of the world and ideologies that basically rally around and spend all this money and time and effort and just so much emotional investment in making sure that they bring this guy home. And I think it is a beautiful, beautiful, fantastically well shot, well acted, well scripted movie. What? Let me kick it back to you. Yeah. What do you think about it? It is not dystopian at all. So the
reason why I would categorize it as a dystopian movie is just like I said, like it's about a guy that's stuck on Mars. I mean, how much more dystopian can you get than that? That's terrible, right? Okay, so a couple things right off the bat. I just want to just say this right off the bat. Of all the movies that you've made me watch on this for this podcast, this is actually one of the better ones, Yancy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is one of the better ones. I was surprised, and I didn't think it was going to go that way. I watched this movie with my wife, and she was at least excited that Matt Damon was in it. Apparently he's a hottie, Yancy. Who knew? Whenever I think of Matt Damon, I think of that marionette from Team America World Police.
Matt Damon.
That's it right there. That's it. So, apparently a large swath of the public finds him to be a sex symbol. So anyway, my wife was all excited to watch this movie because of Matt Damon. And after about 4 minutes, she's like, oh, this movie's dumb. But you know what? and I was kind of with her. I'm like, oh God, I don't know if I'm going to like this movie. But here's one of the things I didn't share her opinion. I actually thought the movie was pretty good, all things considered. But a couple things though. One of the reasons why I liked it, you kind of got into it, was it just didn't all take place on Mars. I was thinking, oh man, yeah, okay. My first thought was, oh, I really liked this movie the first time I saw it when it was called Castaway, and I started getting into that. But then what I liked was the fact that then it was almost 50-50 between Mars and back on Earth.
Yeah.
And that I was like, thank goodness. If it was 2 hours of Matt Damon on Mars, it's just like when I had to watch that stupid movie Moon that you made me watch, with Sam Rockwell, and I was like,
it's completely on this moon base, right?
I hated it, and it was just, I hated that movie. But the fact that this one shifts back to Earth and shows Houston and what they're trying to do, so then I was like, okay, now this movie has some, and then it's at least grounded in something, and you're invested in it in some way rather than just watching some guy try to survive. And then you could see kind of the back and forth how they're plotting and trying to make it happen. So I actually thought it was pretty good. I have a couple of questions for it that came to my mind, and I made some notes. So hopefully you can have some answers for me.
Okay.
Why were they on Mars in the first place? I don't think that was established, was it? Why were they there?
Basically, these were scientific expeditions. They were collecting, like it says in different pieces of dialogue throughout the film, that they were running experiments. They were collecting rock samples. Basically, like I like to think of it as this was the first set of missions in an attempt to start colonizing and eventually terraforming Mars. I've read the book once. I can't remember the exact details. As I don't even think they get into specifically why he is there. It's more along the lines of just data gathering. So they're gathering information about the planet. They're doing all types of tests, and like Mark Watney is a botanist himself. So like they're going to see if certain things can grow, if he's able to basically, like, does it make sense? It's just all about data gathering. It's just like if one business is researching another and saying they want to acquire them, they start learning about them, and that's the first thing that they do. This is the primary mission here. Is information gathering. There's no permanent established base there. There is like an actual like a little place that he does stay in, but it's not designed to be any type of long-term solution or anything like that. It's only meant to be used a couple times. They're only meant to be there for a certain number of days, and then they come back. But
it's not the Ramada Inn. There's no Ramada Inn there on Mars.
Yeah, correct. This is the intermediate. This is in the very near future, right, where human beings have landed on Mars. We maybe have had half a dozen trips or so there, but nothing as far as like the outer reaching, like 50, 60, 70 years from now, where we've established any type of permanent residence on the planet. And
then another question I had early on, I don't know if this got answered, but where does the power come from? How did they get power? Because they had power inside their little space station there.
Mm-hmm. I assume most of it's solar, and they also talk about plutonium, right? Where he basically went and got that old disposed of plutonium nuclear reactor that they buried in the sand. They use that as a nuclear reactor to get most of their power from. It shows like the Mars rover and stuff where it actually had solar panels and stuff too. So I think it's a combination of solar and the nuclear reactors that they brought with them, and then essentially buried with like the little, like do not dig me up markers because it's radioactive. They buried them off and like remote dunes and stuff inside it. So it's mostly nuclear power that runs things there.
Okay. And I remember I had another question that came to my mind early in the movie, because I was wondering, I thought, if he dies, will his body decompose there? And then they ended up answering that a little bit later in the movie. But the good thing is that at least this movie had me questioning. Like, like unlike some of the other movies you maybe watch where I just kind of shut down or whatever. But
right.
No, like, I was like coming up with questions throughout the movie and stuff. Because another thing that I remember standing up was, sorry, go ahead.
Very, very quickly, because this is like one of the main things that I did want to discuss about this movie, and you just brought it up like perfectly. It's like, kudos to you, virtual high five for like the nice segue. Okay, the one thing that, like, literally the one gripe that I have with this movie, and it's a small one, so I don't want to give like an overweighted importance on this. In the book, obviously, there is no limitation on what you can write with your words, or how creative you can be, or how elaborate or how long a book is, right? I understand that making a movie is hard. You have constraints that you would not have whenever you're writing a book, okay? The worst thing anybody can ever say is the book was better. No, of course it's going to be better, right?
Right.
With that being said, the one thing that I found the most endearing and incredibly charming and super fascinating about the actual Martian book by Andy Weir was how much he goes into depth about the specific science of things. In this movie, it doesn't really give you specific numbers. It doesn't give you calculations. It doesn't give you like an actual thought process or like, like a set of events or like how his mind is working. He's not really ever going into that stuff specifically. And I understand that this was, this is a Matt Damon movie. This was directed by Ridley Scott. Like, this is a Hollywood production. So it's going to have to be a little bit more accessible for the masses. But like, there's so many instances in this movie where like Matt Damon's basically just saying like, oh, I'm just going to grow some potatoes. Whereas in the book, it goes into depth. Like, I need exactly this many calories. I need this many liters of water. The temperature has to be this much. I need this many of this, element and this and this and this, or even whenever they show Childish Gambino's character, Parnell, are you familiar with Donald Glover?
Yeah. He was the guy that came in and he was like really scientific and he kind of knew everything. And
yes.
Okay, yes. I remember that guy. Yep.
And he's like, who are you? And he's like, I am the director of NASA, right?
Right. Yes. Okay.
So, like, even like him, like it shows him just like randomly like in like a server room, like plugged into the servers, and it just says like it just shows his laptop and it's like your numbers check out or the calculations are correct. Like, what calculations, what numbers are being shown there? What processes are you going through to arrive at these assumptions? The biggest charm to the actual book itself is the nitty gritty. It is in the details. And like I said, it doesn't ruin the movie. I still enjoy the movie, obviously. But I wish that they would have incorporated just a little bit more of that. So you get more of like this sense of like, okay, this Mark Watney guy on film, he is charming. He is funny. He's incurably optimistic. He's obviously very good at his job as a botanist and as a scientist and being able to think rationally and quickly. But like, I really wish they would have delved into that more and shown like that huge character arc that he has inside the book, which is like, this is a very, very bright person. And just seeing how his mind works, I felt like they did a little bit of a disservice to the character. Yeah,
it's funny that you mentioned that because I think early on in the movie, like something that stood out to me was when he first realizes that he gets left behind on Mars, and he looks at the camera and he goes, "I'm going to have to science the out of this." And as soon as he said that, the first thing that I said to my wife, I said, this is one of the reasons why Yancy loves this movie right here. Because you love science and you love how things work,
correct.
And so I knew that was right away. But I think you make a good point. And it's really difficult to do in the film is that the book would get into a lot of detail, I guess, about how he does science, the daylight side of stuff. And it's really hard to show in the movie. A couple of things that were like, and I thought they handled it pretty well overall. I mean, I didn't go fact checking it or anything like that, but the explanations that they gave, one that stood out to me though was when he was trying to like disable the heater in the rover and he's like, oh, it's getting really cold in here. I'm thinking, yeah, okay, this is not right. It's like minus 100 degrees on Mars. If you're turning that heat off, you're dead instantly. Like, you'll freeze. It's like Canada, for crying out loud. It's like minus 100.
He was in a spacesuit, of course, but yes, I do.
But still, that kind of got me. And another thing that stood out to me early in the movie, and I made a note of it, and I don't, I don't know what it was, but it was about him. I noticed like he was always clean shaven, and they kept elapsing those SOLs, and I'm like, he's clean shaven, so I'm assuming he's shaving every day. And that brings me to another thing. That was it sols or SOLs? Because to me, SOL,
a soul.
It was a soul. Because I thought if it's SOL, that would be kind of funny. Because SOL, do you know what SOL stands for?
I do. This is a family show, though, Chris. Even though I already said once.
Yeah, you did. So yeah, it means that you're S out of luck, right? But so it was soul. Soul, is that right?
Right.
It's like Mars Days or something.
So it's basically, that's exactly what it is. You nailed it on the first try. So obviously Mars's orbit is not the exact same length as Earth's. So that's just like a standardization of time, saying that you're there for how many sols. And it's just it's a quick conversion. If somebody were on Earth, to be like, oh, if he was there for 30 sols, it would equal this many Earth days. Like
dog years or something. Because to me, soul, just as a complete, aside, as I like to do sometimes on this show, there used to be this Canadian television show called Soul, and I think maybe somebody could like tweet at me or something. Actually, I think it was like Parlez-Moi or something like that, and it had this like French clown in it, He was like a tramp type clown. Is that what the ones that are like sad, the sad clowns? And his job was like he was supposed to teach like basic French words to like English people.
How did we get here?
I know. Every time it used to come on TV when I was a kid, I'd always turn the channel. We had like 2 channels back then, and I would rather watch like the news than this stupid French clown. But anyway, I digress. Like I say, I like to go off on tangents. But as Saul, well, that was a Canadian thing. Okay, a couple things I really liked about this movie. This is going to be surprising to no one at all, Yancy. Number one, at one point he was watching Happy Days, and so needless to say.
Yes.
Anytime you nominate a millennial movie for the podcast and it has Fonzie in it, I'm totally cool with that. Luckily for you, Yancy, it wasn't the episode where Fonzie jumps the shark. Do you know what that is? What that means?
Yes, of course, Chris. And you mentioned the Fonz. Like, in all seriousness, I knew you would bring it up, and like this was gonna be like a litmus test to see if you had actually like really paid attention to the movie, because I knew if you saw that and if you were actually paying attention to the movie, it would be brought up in the podcast. Like, I literally made a note of this for the podcast notes.
And later on, I think when Houston asked him to pose for a photo, remember he gives the 2 thumbs up.
Hey,
and I think it was it Kristen Wiig's character or somebody? She says, "Oh, I asked him for a photo, and he's the Fonz." So again, any movie with a Fonzie reference is okay on my book. So that was one thing I liked. The other thing that I liked as a throwback to Gen X was there was the incorporation of disco music, and when they first showed him watching Fonzie and listening to disco music. Part of me was like, did they go up to Mars like back in the 70s? Like, why is he watching Happy Days and listening to disco music? So a little bit, it threw me off a bit. I guess it turned out one of the other characters on there, she liked disco music or something, and so she brought it with her. Right.
Yeah. So everybody gets like a small bin of personal effects that they can take with them. And so that's how he ended up finding like, random, like the symbols that he uses to communicate with them, like the deca symbols or hexa symbols. I can't remember what it was called. I'm not that smart, but like basically like the only music in the entire place was like he went through her stuff and found like, it was just a bunch of disco music, and the only movies that he could find was like old 70s stuff. Like everybody brought different things with them, and like that was the only type of actual media that he could consume. So, I mean, if you have a choice of like being by yourself and either listening to what you think is bad music or just listening to no music at all, I think most people would actually prefer to listen to bad music.
Yeah, and I mean they did explain that she brought up the disco music, but I don't think they ever explained why they brought along episodes of Happy Days to watch. That was really odd. Another thing I thought that was interesting was how duct tape basically fixes everything. Like he basically uses it to fix every single problem he comes across. And I don't know what it's like down in the US, Yancy, but up here in Canada, there's like a running joke with all of us that if anything is broken, anything at all, you use duct tape. And so that's
definitely an American thing too, especially in the Southeast for sure.
Perfect. So for me, it was quite funny when I see that duct tape fixes everything, even on Mars. For Matt Damon.
Matt Damon.
But because at one point I think the whole front door blew off, and he fixed the whole thing with duct tape. Apparently when they send astronauts into space, they send them with a lifetime unlimited supply of duct tape. It's like half of the NASA budget, apparently. I don't know. One other question that came up scientifically, because we mentioned how this movie is all about he's going to science the daylights out of this, and it's all about science. But one thing that stuck out to me was, I think at one point he was like 2 years into his being there. How does it that you eat nothing but potatoes for 2 years and you're still ripped? Like, he took his shirt off and he's ripped because my wife is like, "Oh yeah, Matt Damon's so hot." I'm like, wait a minute, he's been eating nothing but potatoes for 2 years. How does this work? Like, if that was the case, that you eat nothing but potatoes for 2 years and you're ripped, my consumption of potato chips should mean that I should look like The Rock. Like, instead, I look like a bag of wet cement. So how is this possible? I don't understand. To me, that seemed a little bit odd.
Maybe it was a little odd. Obviously, there's a little bit of Hollywooding that's going on there. I will say this: towards the end of it, he has lost a ton of weight, right? And so you got to think he's initially anticipating being there for a certain number of days, and then all of a sudden, the hat blows, and he basically loses a huge amount of food growing capacity. Like, all of his potato trees freeze, the soil's completely corrupted, everything, right? So he went from having like a certain caloric intake that he could sustain to where all of a sudden there was going to have to be drastic rationing. So Mars's gravity is only 30% of the Earth's. So technically, like, the effect of gravity doesn't make it to where like your body technically isn't taxing nearly as much, right? So 1,000 calories a day can actually go a little bit further than it would on Earth, just because there's a lot of different considerations that just from a pure biological standpoint, it doesn't take nearly as much to stay alive. So given the fact that like he's obviously taking vitamin supplements, it shows that they have a full prescription. Anything you can think of, they have there. At one point, he even talks about how like he's just randomly going to crush up some Vicodin and put it in his potatoes just because he wants to feel good, which kind of like plays into like the whole like who he is as a character. He's just like this funny person to begin with. But yeah, I mean, when you couple that with the fact that like he's specifically like rationing off his food as it gets closer and closer to where like you're going to start seeing like his body basically eating itself. You know what I mean? So I think that explains a little bit. I know it's not perfect. He probably should have looked a lot worse towards the end of the movie than he actually did. But I do think that they at least tried. They made it a point to show him at the very beginning of the film just completely jacked, looking like a Marvel superhero or something. And then towards the end, they show like he's completely emaciated. His teeth are starting to rot, like all that stuff. So there's definitely an effort there to be at least somewhat accurate.
Seemed to be awful quick in the timeline of the film. Like it was like he was ripped, and then all of a sudden he's got a beard and he's like emaciated. And so it was just, I don't know, there was another thing that stood out to me. There was a scene back on Earth and they had, I think there were two Chinese characters that were speaking in Chinese to each other and there was no subtitles. And it was a long scene, which I understand why they'd kind of want to do that just to be realistic. But I remember thinking like, this is a really, really long scene with no subtitles going. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Another question I have, though, and maybe you can answer this because you're the science guy. Another thing that stuck out to me was, remember when they were on Earth and they were like tracking him on Mars? Like, oh, he's there. Look at now he's moving over there. Now he's moving there. How do they track him on Mars? They don't have
satellite.
Oh, but their satellites close enough to Mars to do that?
Yeah, they have multiple satellites. All these satellite pictures. I mean, Chris, at any given point right now, like we have a couple. I mean, at least half a dozen satellites that are circling around Mars right now, taking photos constantly. So like they already knew what the topography looked like for the place. They already had, you got to think this is a couple years into the future too, right? Like maybe 10, 15, 20 years, something like that.
I thought it was in 2015 or something.
I mean, in either point, like it's in the near future. Like this isn't like they have like established like a full colony and like they have,
so it is another movie set in the future, young man. I tell you,
barely though, right? Nothing really that we're seeing there isn't something that like realistically like we couldn't concoct today. The biggest difference between like what we see in that film versus right now is like I firmly believe, if this is getting on a tangent, but and it's, you know me, I just love talking about space. For us to colonize Mars, it is going to have to be a co-op of multiple countries, right? It's going to have to be like very like Star Trekian, where you mentioned at the top of the show, like, yeah, this is dystopian. Just because he goes through like travails and you know, he has like a rough time in Mars, like that doesn't make it necessarily dystopia. Like when you go back to Earth kind of feels the same, except for the fact that like you see the Chinese and the Americans, two, you know, world powers who historically do not work together very much, working alongside each other and basically settling their differences. At one point, it even shows them like saying like, we don't do things like that in NASA. We haven't done that since 1995, or, you know, them like settling their differences to like save like a human being. Like that's like a real thing that like happens. So like, it's just showing like how things can be like in the very, very near future. If we want to actually be like a multi-planetary system, it's gonna have to be something like in Star Trek, where basically like world wars are solved. Star Trek isn't dystopian at all. Star Trek, they live in a utopia. Yes, once they leave and they're on the Star Trek Enterprise, like they go through all these different all these different problems and stuff just because of Cardassians and Klingons and stuff are obviously they're jerks. But this is like
the Kardashians are on Star Trek.
Cardassians.
Oh, the Cardassians. Okay.
Yeah, Kim K and all that. Yeah. I'm rambling a little bit at this point, but let me get to like what I think is one of the main themes of this film.
Sure.
And it is, I think it's a lot about human spirit. Okay. And not, again, you know, I gave you like the whole spiel on like my cat and his energy in my house and stuff. And I'm not trying to sound like super like new wave or anything, but like human beings, whenever they work together, there's a reason why we're the most like transcendent species in the history of the world, right? Whenever we work together, we elevate, the floor becomes higher. Everybody improves everybody. Iron sharpens iron, essentially. And I love the fact that like this movie, like it's he is there on Mars by himself, but like you said, so much of the work is being done on Earth, helping him. Like these people they have identical copies of all of the machines and the equipment and the fort that he's basically staying in. They have all this stuff back home, and they're experimenting and they're trying to drill holes and stuff and see how that they can fix this or finagle that to get him where he needs to go. Like there's so many different pieces of cooperation, different people who would never have intersected in real life, basically bouncing ideas off each other. Like, I've mentioned this ad nauseum already, but like something as crazy as like the Chinese basically lending us like their spaceship, you know what I mean? Like, it's just crazy. And this is like one of those, it wouldn't be so far-fetched to think that like you could see something like this where, in today's politics, Chris, I know you and I, we always say that this isn't a politics show, but we like tiptoe around politics and like we try to inject it sometimes, even though we're just talking about pop culture.
Sure.
But like the idea of globalism, it has like this very negative connotation to it where people think that if you're being a globalist, it means that you're putting the ideals and the wants and needs of another person that's not you over like your own, right?
Yeah, and that's not it at all.
And that's not it at all. But like it's basically just talking about like recognizing the fact that like we are all human beings. You know what I mean? Like we're all, if you follow any type of like religious affiliation, most of these people believe that we're creating like the image of a creator and that we're all equal and all these things. But that doesn't somehow that's trumped and that's forgotten about whenever you bring in tribalism, right? Mm-hmm. The dude that lives down the street, well, he doesn't live on our block, so it's an us and them kind of thing. And I think that this one, like, it's literally flirts with that idea of people working together, putting aside differences, and it flirts with that the entire time. And for something that takes place in like a cold, lifeless, uninhabited planet such as Mars, I think that this movie has so many humanistic like qualities and so many different moments where just humans just like we just triumph and prevail and just work alongside each other. I just honestly, I think it's magical that they were able to package it in a movie like this with such a high budget, with so many like just noteworthy actors, and there was just so much going on in this movie, and you could see so many different paths that it could have taken to fail, and somehow, weirdly enough, it worked really, really well. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head on everything on there. I thought it was a really, really well done movie. I think there was a lot of those things going on thematically that I did like in terms of you mentioned globalism. These are humans right across, the world helping each other out. For a higher cause, in this case, and that higher cause is science, really. But at the heart of it, it's not just science, because it's about saving somebody. It's about
one guy
helping one person, and it's so cool. And so I think all the things you said are absolutely 100% correct. I thought this was a really good movie. Of all the movies that you've made me watch, it was one of the best ones, I would say, for sure. Just to get dystopian though for one last second before we go.
I love that word.
I do. Well, before I go there, I will want to mention, what about the casting? I thought the casting was pretty good overall. Of course you got Matt Damon, and but I thought Kristen Wiig seemed like a little bit of an odd choice for her character. She stood out to me as being an odd choice. I liked, you said his name was Glover. I liked him. I thought overall, I thought the casting was really, really good. So, and I've struggled with that with a lot of the movies, the millennial films that you've suggested in the past, but I thought this one was really good. And I'm not the biggest Matt Damon fan.
Matt Damon.
But I found he was really good in this. He's good in some things, and in other ones I can take him or leave him. I thought he was really good. I thought it was a really good movie overall.
I totally agree with you with the casting, and I do think that it's interesting that they went with so many actors and actresses who aren't necessarily the biggest actors in the world. Matt Damon is on the short list of some of the most successful of probably all time if you go by gross.
But he's Matt Damon.
Yeah, so he's Matt Damon. But aside from that, like somebody, actresses and actors who I'm very, very fond of, whose work I've really enjoyed, like Jessica Chastain, obviously she's phenomenal in Interstellar, and has a bunch of stuff. Kristen Wiig, I remember watching the movie, and I actually remember watching a YouTube video beforehand where they're like, there is one casting decision where as soon as you see her, everybody in the audience is going to laugh because you're not going to believe that she is in this movie. And it happened. As soon as she showed up in the movie, she's like the I don't know, what would you say, like the PR person, like the publicist, like the person who deals with like the perception of the agency and how they broadcast themselves to the public. So she's really good at her job. But it was like when you see her, you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, but weirdly enough, like her personality kind of fits that role. So I thought it was really interesting. You mentioned Jeff Daniels as Teddy Sanders. He's the head of NASA. He's, he is not funny. He is not like this guy who's trying to charm people over. He is the proverbial corporate hard ass who has to go through the bureaucratic red tape and has to do things the right way. And, like even like all the complimentary pieces, like the people who are like the 8th or 9th or 15th most notable actor or actress in this movie are phenomenal actors, like Michael Pena or Sean Bean or Kate Mara, Sebastian Stan. Like there's just so many, like there was so many decisions in this. Even like Mackenzie Davis, she was like the kind of like the nerdy girl who like had control over the satellites from Earth with the glasses, like the really pretty blonde girl. I don't know if you've watched Black Mirror. She's in the San Junipero episode of Black Mirror, and it's absolutely phenomenal. But just like all these like really kind of like cult favorite actors and actresses, like it's I don't know, man. It's just there's so many things about this, like just their decision. And like Donald Glover, obviously, like I said, he's Childish Gambino, who's like just one of the hottest musicians and actors, and like he's just doing everything right now. Just to see all of them like this conglomeration is the word I'm trying to say. All this together and how they work together, and like we forget the fact that Mark Watney, Matt Damon's character, he's basically by himself the entire movie. There's a couple minute scene at the very beginning where they're about to, they're going through some stuff. There's a storm there. The crew leaves, and then this entire movie, he is by himself, right? And yet they did such a good job of developing a relationship between the crew and him, especially whenever the crew like gets to talk to him while he is still on Mars, and you see the personalities and you see how like they jab at each other, and hey, botany isn't a real science, or you suck at your job, like. There's just so many of these like little personal things that actually we always talk about character development and caring about how these people interact with each other. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And for all these people having such small parts and so many different actors being in it, I just feel like they nailed that. Like I cared about every single character. It's just, I could talk about this all the time. Like this is one of those movies where, like I said, I read the book. I loved it, right? I read the book. This is one of those where like I read it in a few hours. I powered through it. I was like, wow, this was amazing. And then you hear that they're going to make the movie. It's optioned, to film, and then you get scared, Chris. You start sweating, right? I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you love a book so much and you hold it like so dear to your heart that you almost don't want to see it because you are afraid of what they're going to do to it, right? Like I'm sure you've experienced this with sequels too, where like the first was so good, and then they made the Matrix Reloaded and the Matrix Revolutions, and you're like, why did you screw up the Matrix franchise, right?
Oh yeah, it's like when they came out with Meatballs 2. Oh man,
yeah,
I was just so
exactly right, and I was so scared. But
Revenge of the Nerds 2. Oh, it was so
exactly. Why'd you do that? It was a classic. So like I was pleasantly surprised that it went in this direction, and I know I'm just like gushing over this movie. I did give one.
It's a good movie.
I gave one small critique on it, which was like I said, I wish they would have gone in at least one scene where it was just a little bit more into like the minutia of the science and like his thought process and like just how this guy's mind works. And I think it would have kind of endeared him to the audience a little bit more, knowing that this isn't just like a charismatic, funny guy, but it's also like just like a painfully bright dude. You know what I mean? And that's something that I feel like was lost in the film. But overall, though, it's an absolute home run. This movie got nominated for a ton of awards, and deservedly so. I'm actually not even sure what it won. I think it was nominated for like best comedy or something like that.
Best comedy.
Yeah, no, seriously, like they didn't know how to group this movie. Like it's not really like just like a science fiction movie. It's not a drama. It's not really just a comedy.
Boy, I tell you, millennial comedies have really gone downhill. If this is a comedy, let me tell you, I'm gonna go back and watch Airplane again.
This movie gets a lot of laughs, Chris. Even you have to admit this.
It's charming in parts, that's for sure. Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's a comedy. So just to go back for just 1 second before we wrap it up and we get on to the fun part. As I mentioned, just to throw a dystopian spin on things. So it came out in 2015. Could you imagine, Yancy, going up into space on a mission to Mars? You leave your whole life behind you, your friends, your family, and you run into a storm. You get a steel rod impaled in your gut. You get left behind. You got to eat potatoes made, out of your own and then you float through space and you have to cut your spacesuit and propel yourself toward your rescuers. You spend 4 years on a long journey back, all that. You get home and you find out Donald Trump is the president. Matt Damon just gets back in the rocket and just goes back to Mars.
Matt Damon.
Oh my gosh.
But anyway, I would give it a rating. You want to give it a rating out of 10? It's obviously going to be high for you. What do you got?
In all seriousness, Chris, I don't think there's anything as like a perfect piece of art. I will give this like a 9.5. From like a watchability standpoint, I think it's incredibly rewatchable. From a humor standpoint, for character development, caring about the characters, how they interact with each other, the CGI in this is absolutely phenomenal. Like if you saw this in 3D, which I know you watch this at home, which is fine, but if you saw it like in an IMAX 3D, it was absolutely amazing. It was one of the handful of movies where like it made sense that it was in 3D and it actually added something to it as opposed to feeling kind of gimmicky. It's so smart. There's science, there's humor, there's a humanism to it that like you just don't see in science fiction movies a lot. I got to give it like a 9.5. It's just a fantastic film all around.
Wow, that's high. I'll tell you what, I thought it was good. I thought it was bordering on almost great, but I don't think it was a masterpiece by any. It was visually interesting. Some of the characters were great. Matt Damon, was great. I would probably give it an 8. I'll give it an 8 out of 10, which is high for me.
An 8 for you, Chris? I will take that. That is great.
Yeah, so there you go. So time now, what do you think to have some
fun with Yancy?
Okay, so I'll tell you what, Yancy, something a little bit different. Since he's such a fixture of millennial pop culture, I figured this week, my friend, that I'd give you a round of Matt Damon trivia. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it a step further, though. Okay, I'm going to take it a step further. Because ever since they did Good Will Hunting together, and they won the Oscar for Best Screenplay, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck have always been kind of associated together. And they're good friends, too, right? So what I'm going to do for this round of Fun with Yancy, I'm going to make it really easy, okay? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to name him a movie. And all you have to do, Yancy, is tell me if the movie starred Ben Affleck, or if the movie starred Matt Damon, or if it starred both of them. Okay, so it's a 1 in 3 chance of getting it all right. Okay,
this sounds like it would be super easy, but this is going to go horribly.
And to make it even better, if you guess Matt Damon as the person that stars in the movie, and you're correct, and the movie actually did star Matt Damon, you're going to hear this.
Matt Damon.
There's a little incentive to get it right? And for another
There's
chance.
There's a little incentive.
Yeah, and for us to be able to hear Matt Damon again. So that's always good. So, okay, so I name the movie, and you tell me if it starred Ben Affleck, or if it starred Matt Damon, or both. Super easy. Here we go. Okay, nice and easy. Pearl Harbor.
Both.
No, it was just Ben Affleck. Sorry.
Okay, This is going great.
Okay, Reindeer Games. Did Reindeer Games star Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, or both?
Matt Damon.
No, it was Ben Affleck. Oh, jeez. 2003's Stuck on You. Stuck on You. Was it Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, or both?
Ben Affleck.
No, it was Matt Damon. Jeez.
You're already in my head. You are already in my head.
School Ties from 1992. Did it star Matt Damon? Did it star Ben Affleck? Or both?
Both.
You got one correct. Congratulations.
Yes.
All right. The Talented Mr. Ripley.
I know it's definitely Matt Damon. I'm going to say just Matt Damon.
Matt Damon is correct.
Matt Damon.
Oh, and we get to hear Matt Damon. So that's nice. 1993. We're going back to 1993. Dazed and Confused.
I have not seen it. I'm going to say just Matt Damon.
No, it was Ben Affleck. Okay, 1999, your favorite year for movies, Yancy. Dogma. Is it
just Matt Damon?
No, it was both of them. The Legend of Bagger Vance.
Matt Damon.
Just Matt Damon is correct.
Matt Damon.
Okay, Paycheck from 2003. Was it Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, or both of them?
Ben Affleck.
That is correct. How about 2010's The Company Men?
Both of them.
No, it was just Ben Affleck. Jersey Girl from 2004. Who was
just Ben Affleck?
No, Matt Damon had a small part as a PR executive, my friend.
The movie was really bad, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was terrible. 1997's Chasing Amy.
Matt Damon.
No, it was both of them. Matt Damon had a small part.
Have they really been in this many movies together?
Oh, of course. What about... I'm going way back for you here, all right? 1989's Field of Dreams, Yancy. We love this. We love baseball. It's a baseball movie. Is Ben Affleck in this movie, Matt Damon, or both? Field of Dreams.
Matt Damon.
No, I'm sorry. They were both in this movie. They both had uncredited roles as fans at Fenway Park when Ray took Terrence Mann to the Red Sox.
No.
Yep. Okay, and the last one. Nice and easy. 1998's Saving Private Ryan.
Oh.
Come on, it's an easy one. I'm going with an easy one at the end.
Just Matt Damon.
Matt Damon.
Yes, that's correct. Yes. And I went with the total obvious one, not because I wanted to go easy on you, Yancy, but just because I wanted to hear Matt Damon.
Matt Damon.
One more time to end the show. So there's that. so that was a kind of a fun way to end things. Like I say, those two guys are like always associated together. So I thought we'd have some fun. And you absolutely bombed it. And you're a millennial. You're supposed to know these guys, I tell you.
Hey, if I'm anything, it's consistent, Chris.
This is true. And this is why we call it Fun with Yancy, because we definitely have fun with you at the end of the show. And it's always good. Okay. So if you'd like to get a hold of us, you can get a hold of us on Twitter at Yancy Eaton or at C. McBrien, or you can go to popgoesyourworld.com. All of our contact information is there. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, if you enjoy the show, take a minute out of your day, go over to iTunes and write a review for the show. We would certainly appreciate it. And it really, really helps us out around here. Until next time, this is Chris McBrien for Yancy Eaton saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at C. McBrien or at Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.